Hello, I am JB Coutinho, Head of Consumer Partnerships Product at Quicken Loans. I am also a member of the Women in Product Content Selection Committee. I am very excited to welcome all of you to the Leadership That Illuminates stage. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors without whom this event would not be possible. I would also like to encourage all of you to turn off email and the multitasking we all love to do and to be fully present. We have a fabulous lineup of speakers with a wealth of experience to share. And as you listen to the speakers, share with us your favorite speaker quote in the chat. Tell us what really resonates and fires you up. During this session, Catapulting from Change, we have three wonderful speakers. First on stage, we have Heather McClellan. Heather does emotional intelligence consulting, coaching, and mediation for companies ranging from startups to Fortune 100. She's worked with clients including Siemens, Uber, and Square. Her work includes collaborating with Silicon Valley startups on organizational health, as well as training teams and executives on EQ skills. She will be sharing her experience and expertise with us during her presentation titled How to Rock Difficult Conversations. Please join me in welcoming Heather to our stage.
Hello, I'm Heather McClellan, and I am here to talk about how to rock difficult conversations. I work with seed stage startups to Fortune 100 companies and know that these are absolutely learnable skills. Even though our society, our world does not teach us great ways to have tough conversations, we do have good information that feed frameworks of how to approach this. And we'll be going over some of those today. Know that no matter how scary or awkward these conversations might feel to imagine or even approach, it does get better with practice. It will get smoother, you will start to feel better and even look forward to them because your Pavlovian system knows that resolution is coming, or at least some catharsis or something. So have something to write on, whether it's digital or analog, because I'll ask you some reflection questions. And in this talk, I'll be going over psychology behind the frameworks and the frameworks themselves. So now imagine who's somebody with whom you want to have a conversation that feels scary to talk about. Bring this up in your mind and notice if this situation never changed, how would that be for you? In other words, what's at stake if you never have this conversation? There are a lot of statistics about what it costs company in terms of morale, retention, productivity, bottom line, by people not having these conversations. If you want statistics, feel free to reach out to me. If you need to enroll someone, there also are some in my slide deck. But for time, we're going to go straight into how do you have these conversations? And people generally avoid them because they fear retribution or that it will be futile. So looking into a way to have these conversations go reliably well, one key thing is to note that there are really two things that need to be resolved. There's the situation, the problem itself, which might be logistical, structural, rational. And then there's the stress caused by the situation or the emotions caused by it. So there's the emotional charge and the rational issue. And addressing one problem does not solve the other automatically or at all. So know that, and conflating the two is not going to lead to great outcomes because humans are ultimately emotional beings that sometimes are reasonable, not the other way around. And on this topic, Daniel Kahneman, Nobel laureate, did research indicating that we sort of have two brains in a sense. There's system 1 and system 2, as he calls them. System 2 is rational. It is perfectly reasonable. It has a slower response time. It's very analytical. And it's always going to have a very reasoned response to things. System 1 is the one that its job is not to be reasonable. Its job is to pattern match based on your past experience and keep you safe. It is a fast gut reflex, an intuitive feeling. It feels true, even when it's really not. And these beliefs quite heavily steer us, our actions, our emotions, etc. And they can be totally separate beliefs than system 2. For example, a lot of adults say they don't believe in ghosts. If you put them in a creepy old house at night, system 1, it turns out, does believe in ghosts. They get scared. It has seen horror movies, these fantasy worlds in which it sees scary things happen, and it's like, I know what's going to happen here. Be afraid. So that's one piece, is system 1 and system 2. And add to this the fact that in the absence of information, people are wired to make up stories. There is a lot of research pointing towards this, and having conversations that address issues can close the delta between stories and reality. And again, those stories might feel true to people and they lead to rumors, gossip, etc., or rifts between folks. I might think a colleague doesn't like me and react to this person as though it's like, well, you don't like me anyways, or you're kind of against me. When really what might be happening for them is they're giving me space because they think I'm really busy and they really respect the work that I'm doing and they don't want to get in my way. Maybe they're intimidated. Both people might be making up stories. We can only close that delta by having conversations. Next, burnout is a very major thing that people face, especially in light of events happening in the world right now. And one core component of burnout is emotional exhaustion. And to not have emotional exhaustion, to move through one's feelings, to rejuvenate here, one needs to let emotions run their full cycle. The stress and emotional cycle needs to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that end is not correlated to the problem that caused the stress ending. In college, I would go and turn in my final paper or take my last exam. And for weeks, I'd fantasized about this moment. I am going to be so relieved and just elated and feel so good as I walk away. And it never happened. I always felt just hit by a truck. I would just be catatonic on the couch for a while. My nervous system had not gotten the message, which is actually what happens, is our bodies aren't linked to, oh, I turned in my taxes, this thing resolved. We're still in an emotional cycle, and we need cues that our bodies can read to tell us that things are okay now, it is resolved. And there are a number of ways to do this. There's a resource and list on my slide deck, but some are to move physically, do deep breathing work like box breathing, have a good cry, get a long hug from someone you trust, creative expression, and also positive social interaction. Now, for yourself, if you are approaching a difficult conversation about which you are emotionally charged, you can do things to complete your stress cycle, to discharge some of that emotional buildup and be more calm and present for the conversation that you need to have. If somebody is speaking to you about a challenging topic, then something you can do to help them move through the emotional cycle and complete the stress cycle is to provide positive interaction, and good empathy is a really great way to do this. So we'll touch on that a little bit at the end. And for now, given all those pieces, I would love for you to get ready to write, and we're going to go over frameworks that touch on both the logistics and the emotions of the problem at hand. So I'm going to go over some conversation prep. Before you go into a difficult conversation, it's a great idea to get clear on what's happening for you, what are you feeling, what are you fearing, hoping, wanting, all that. So I'll do a quick overview and then give you a moment to reflect. Feel free to start jotting notes now. Who's the person you want to talk to or group that you have a conversation with, and what is a fear you have about what might happen? Might be, I'm afraid that you won't be receptive to this. I'm afraid that you're going to judge me for being upset. I'm afraid that I'll find out that you actually don't like me. I'm afraid that whatever. So fill in the things. What's the fear? And are you willing to accept this as a possible consequence? Then what's a hope you have about the conversational outcome? Why might it be worth it? What good thing could happen? Is there a story you made up about the situation? What's your core concern, and what request might you have? Requests are done best if they are really actionable. I want you to treat me with more respect. Might be true, and for the other person, because they are not the same human as you, they might really earnestly want to fulfill this, but they don't know how to, what does respect look like to you? And if you say, instead, if you are going to be more than 5 minutes late, could you please text me to let me know? Because that would have you feel more respected, but also it's more actionable for this other person. So I'm going to give you about a minute now. Go ahead. About 10 seconds left. So bring that to a close for now. It's okay if you didn't get to fully flesh it out, but know that sometimes doing just the prep work is enough. You'll start to feel better from having gotten more clear. And if you want to still have that conversation, great. And ideally you're doing this with the intention to build, repair, have things feel better, not just I'm going to vent at you. So notice if you are really emotionally charged, again, take that time that you need to discharge before you go into this so you get yourself in a good place. Then the conversation itself is going to use a framework called nonviolent communication. It's based on that. Slightly funny name, but nonviolent communication, as awkward or non-intuitive as it may seem, it actually has really good reasoning behind it. That one, ownership language, when you did the subjectively true thing, I felt, it means that what you say is not arguable. And it's just, if people are saying, oh, you were a jerk, then they can argue against that. They can get defensive. But if it's, when you spoke over me as I was mid-sentence in that meeting, I felt frustrated. There's no reasonable argument to make against that. You can't really claim that it's not true. And the other reason that we use NVC, nonviolent communication, is it provides you with something called linguistic distance by saying, I felt angry when that happened, rather than I am angry. It gives a little bit more psychological distance between yourself and the emotion, and that allows you to take on more perspective. This is shown through various research findings, so it actually is a useful thing functionally to do this. So going into the structure of what to do, and notice that it's going to ask you to name a feeling. So it's get permission to have the conversation and make sure it's a good time for the other person. Set some context, state what's your fear, what's your hope. Then when you did this objectively true thing that could have been measured by a camera, not a judgment, not, when you were inconsiderate, but what's the actual thing that occurred? I felt. And the feeling piece, in addition to using a real feeling and not it made me feel, not a word that subtly blames, like I felt abandoned, I felt lied to. Those are actually judgments. You can say I felt devastated, I felt sad, I felt lonely. Those are real feelings. There's a feelings wheel you can download online, just Google feelings wheel, and that can be really helpful. But another thing about feelings is that it's like developing a food palette where you can taste a soup and say, oh, there's a note of kaffir lime in this. Similarly, you can really get granular about what you're feeling, and it's a good idea for lots of reasons around your emotional intelligence skills. Most people in Brené Brown studies could only identify 3 feelings: mad, happy, sad. You have way more feelings than that. They're there whether or not you name them, and it's useful to name them, partly in using this framework. So when I felt, the story I made up is or was, and that's optional. If you notice that you make a story, that might help it make sense to the other person. Like, this is a story that I made up about this situation, and what I'm wanting is, or my core concern is, and would you be willing to? Making that, again, a specific actionable request. So I'm going to give you about a minute right now to practice this with the conversation you have in mind. Feel free to say it out loud or in your head, or just take notes. If you do have time to say it out loud, I do recommend that. About 10 seconds left. So the last point here is, after you've said what you need to, take some time to get the other person's perspective. And if they seem emotionally upset or charged, empathize with them. So paraphrase, what do you think you heard them say? And then what do you imagine you get about them, or what do you relate to about the situation? I am providing you with a empathy document that goes into more detail about this, but really getting just, okay, so it sounds like this. Did I get that right? People really appreciate that. It's like a brain hack, as well as, oh, I imagine that you really value the team is in integrity and really does what they say you're going to do, because trust matters. Is that about it? Is it like, did that make sense? So checking with the person, and that, or what you relate to without hijacking the attention, these kind of magically discharge what the person is feeling. And it works really well if you try this out. So, and again, keep trying, and this gets better over time. You could even get feedback on it, whatever the case. So with all of this, these are learnable skills. They will get better with practice. And I have clients who've said that they practiced for a couple of months. It was terrifying at first to have these conversations, and now it feels totally fine, and they feel skillful in them, and their departments are doing so much better, and all kinds of good things have come from it. So it really does work well. And notice after you have the conversation how you feel. If you feel better, and take a moment and savor that feeling, that more rapidly rewires your brain towards preferring that action of being direct and going ahead and having the conversation. So good luck wherever you are in the organization. If you're a leader, you have a lot of opportunity to impact culture shift. And whoever you are in the organization, if you're a solo contributor, know that you can make a big impact on at least your immediate bubble of influence and your well-being in your workplace. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Next up, please welcome Cynthia Farrell. Cynthia believes that great places to work and great business results are based on behaviors, not beer in the break room. She brings this mantra to life with over 20 years of experience in leadership, talent, and team development, as well as a decade leading successful organizational culture initiatives. She is also an executive coach and advisor. Please join me in welcoming Cynthia for a presentation titled Key Stages and Leadership Strategies for Critical Transitions.
Hi, I'm Cynthia Farrell, owner and principal of 110 West Group, a leadership consulting firm based in Denver. And I want to tell you a story about when I was cubed. It was a number of years ago in my career. I had a great job with a great company, and also as a senior director, I had a great office. Then our company went through a real estate consolidation, and I got moved into a cube. I got cubed. What made this a big deal for me is that I was the only senior director in the company who didn't get an office and was moved into a cube. And no one explained to me why. I was angry and hurt and felt shame and embarrassment. I swirled and lost productivity. Now, people attach meaning to the most bizarre things, and I attached meaning to that cube. By losing my office, I lost my physical orientation to the organization, along with my sense of place in the company, my perceived sense of competence and value and status to them. In hindsight, I know it wasn't worth the energy I gave it, but the stories I made up in my head of the reason behind this very tangible loss were my perception, and that made it real to me. Now, all of this could have been avoided if someone had a conversation with me to explain why I was the lone senior director without an office, and acknowledge that it sucked. I still would have been irritated and felt the loss of space, but I would have navigated through the change more quickly. Yes, I was reacting to the change, but what I was resisting from the moment I learned of the move until long after it were the losses that accompanied it, the transition. Now, change happens on a daily basis. We all know that. What I'm here to talk to you about today is how to lead yourself and others through the transitions that come with change. To do this, I'll share the key stages and leadership strategies for transitions. Now, I encourage you to think of a change you've experienced recently and keep that in mind as we go through this content. I'll use a variety of examples, including getting a new manager. So let's talk about change. Change is an event. It's situational and it happens to us. Now, these change events occur in our personal and professional lives all the time. On the professional side, it could be changing jobs or companies, getting a new manager, a reorg, an acquisition, or a layoff. Professional changes could even be finding new ways of working with your team or moving to a 100% remote work. Does that sound familiar? Now, personal changes could be big things like the birth of a child, getting married, moving, can be small things as well, or even having passions such as travel or time with friends taken off of the table. Yep, we've experienced a lot of change in the past year. Now, personal or professional, these are all events that are external and happen to us, and they're generally linear. Transition, on the other hand, is this ongoing internal process, a psychological reorientation as we adjust to the change. Transition begins when we know about the change and ends sometime after the change is complete. It's a different process, it's a different duration for everyone who experiences even the same change, and it occurs whether the change is perceived as good or bad. So with the new manager, the transition starts from the time we know our old manager is leaving until well after the new manager is in place, as we build the relationship and learn how to work with someone new. Now, transition management is complementary to change management. You absolutely need change management for successful execution of a change. Transition management focuses on the people side of change. Now, we talk about how people resist change, but generally it's not the change that people resist. We resist the transition that comes with change because with transition comes loss, confusion, uncertainty, even if it's a positive change. We resist that gap, the unknown between what was and what will be. The model of transition management is from the book Managing Transitions by William Bridges. I have a picture of that here. I love this book and I recommend it to everyone, both for personal and professional development. In his transition model, there are 3 phases of transition. We start with the ending. Yep, we start with the end. We can't begin until we end. We enter the ending phase when we begin to psychologically process the change. The ending's filled with feelings like loss, fear, anxiety, even if it's a positive change. But it can also be filled with excitement. So for example, when you get a new manager, there's probably some anxiety about the new person. And if you got along with your old manager, a sense of loss of the relationship. But you might also be kind of excited. And there's a lot of unknowns. The next phase is the neutral zone, or we call it the messy middle. It's called the messy middle because this is often a time of confusion and feeling disconnected, of not knowing where we're going. Imagine that initial period when you're trying to get familiar with how to work with the new manager. It feels messy. This also can be a time of curiosity and receptivity, anticipation for what's coming. And the third phase is the new beginning, when we're at ease and feel confident in our new reality. We have energy and a sense of the future. Now, you'll notice this visual isn't linear. That's because transitions aren't linear. Much like the stages of grief, we bounce around in these phases. One day we can be progressing towards the new beginning, and something happens to set us back to the ending. This fluidity means that we can't chart a nice direct course. We have to be prepared for the messiness of the process, in ourselves and in others. What we can do is recognize where we're at and where others are at and work through the phases. Let me talk a little bit more about each of these phases. Now, as I mentioned, we start with the ending, and endings are hard. The reason endings are hard, why change is hard, is because we have a duality where we both fight to hold on to what's comfortable and what we know, and we fight to let it go so we can move on. like a bird on a wire. We want to stay where we feel safe, but at some point we need to let go. We hold on because of the losses we experience in transitions. You can see some examples of types of losses here, and these aren't the only ones. For example, if you go through an org redesign and your team changes, you might feel like you're losing relationships, group memberships, and routines. If you get moved from one project to another, you might have a sense of losing your sense of identity that's tied up in your expertise and certainty about what your role will bring. If your company's been acquired, you might feel like you're losing control of your destiny and your sense of the future. These losses exist and they're real to you. So what do we do about them? The key is to identify, recognize, and name the losses so you can process them and move forward. Now, as a leader, your job is to help other people recognize and process their losses and move forward. The book includes a number of techniques for guiding yourself and others along that path. As you process your endings, you start to move into the neutral zone, that messy middle. It can feel messy because it's often disorganized, feels chaotic. And think of a time when you went through a major organizational change, and for a period of time, it just felt messy. That's the neutral zone. It's important to recognize that the discomfort that occurs here can be really valuable to you as well, and employ strategies to help you, like seeking out clarifying information and building new relationships. And again, the book has details on strategies you can employ. What's important to remember about the neutral zone is it can be a time of incredible creativity and innovation because it's likely that no one's watching. You have to figure out how to get stuff done, so you might learn new skills or build new patterns and processes. Think about that new manager example, when you might find ways to be more efficient or communicate more effectively. For yourself, this can be a period of exploration and learning. For your teams, it can be a period where you give them the space to get creative, solve problems in unique ways that they wouldn't be able to within the constraints of the new or the old world. And as you move through the neutral zone, you start to shift into the new beginning. And like I said a few minutes ago, the start of the change does not equal the new beginning. You have to end before you can begin, and that means letting go of the old ways and then spending some time in the neutral zone. Now that's just a quick overview of the 3 phases. We could spend hours getting into strategies for each one of these for yourselves and for others. Let's talk for a few minutes about leading others through transitions. Talk a little bit more about that. And by leading, I mean everyone. We are all leaders, whether it's leading a company, leading a team, or helping to lead our peers as they go through transitions. So what's a leader's job during change? The number one job is managing productivity for others and for yourselves. Now, during periods of transition, there is a natural productivity drop as people work through endings in the neutral zone. It's natural. It always occurs. Sometimes quickly, sometimes not so much. As a leader, your job is to help people manage through transitions to lessen the productivity impact. You won't eliminate it entirely, but you can shorten its duration and lessen its depth. You can probably think back on a big organizational change you've experienced and all of the break room chatter or instant message conversations, wondering what was going to happen, and the lack of personal productivity that drives. And that's what happens in transition. So how can you help identify where others are in transition so that you can help lead them forward? First, look for the signs of transition. These signs come out in behaviors that reflect anxiety or self-absorption or guilt generally are going to indicate that the person's in the endings phase. Behaviors of frustration or curiosity, these will show up in the neutral zone. And behaviors of excitement and engagement means you're moving into the new beginning. Those behaviors are signs that can tell you where a person is at. You can listen for the words of transition. This is going to be a disaster, or what's going to happen to us? And similar phrases, well, those indicate endings. I'm really confused, or hey, I had an idea I'd like to try. And those are words of the neutral zone. I can see where this is going, and I'm excited. Those are words of the new beginning. And as you look for signs and listen for words, make sure to recognize the losses and help others do the same and plan for how to let go and move forward. Because whether they're real or perceived, tangible or intangible, the losses are real to the person experiencing them, and they're important to acknowledge. And think back to my cube story. My loss was real to me, and I would have moved on more quickly if someone had just acknowledged it. Also, remember that transition's like a marathon. Everyone runs a different pace, a different race. If you're a leader and you're aware of the change before others, you're up at the starting line maybe, while others might be back in the 10-minute mile start corral. Recognize that you need to meet people where they're at. You have to support them as they run their race. And as I like to remind leaders, when you are tired of talking about something as a leader, that means others are just starting to hear the message. So keep communicating. To recap, as you lead through the phases, you have strategies to help you move others along. In the endings phase, you clarify what's ending and what's not, recognize losses, and implement strategies to help people move forward. In the neutral zone, you communicate over and over the 4 Ps. I'm just going to leave you hanging on the 4 Ps and give you some motivation to read the book. You find temporary solutions and you encourage creativity. And in the new beginning, you celebrate wins big and small, help individuals and their teams articulate their new identity, and stay flexible, because surely more change is on the way. Again, the book goes into detail on each of these. I want to wrap up by emphasizing that transition is learned. It's a skill, a muscle you build with repetition and practice, whether it's at work or in our personal lives. I encourage you to take some time to reflect on some of the changes you've experienced, and there have been many of them in the past year, and how you have moved through your own transitions. The more you reflect, the better you can manage yourself and others when change hits in the future. And since the only constant is change, we know more change is going to come. Now, obviously, I'm passionate about this work. I've been teaching it for nearly a decade. If you'd like to learn more, you can reach me at cynthia@110westgroup.com or on LinkedIn, and you can find out more about the work I do on my website, 110westgroup.com. And one word of warning, don't just Google Cynthia Farrell, as your top hit's going to be a voice actress in New York. Look for me as Cynthia at 110 West Group. Be well, and good luck with your transitions.
Thank you, Cynthia. Next up, please welcome Natalie Gibralter. Natalie is the VP of Commerce Product at Squarespace. She leads the teams responsible for building tools to help customers sell products, content, and services. She joined Squarespace in 2012 as its first product manager and has helped to build a product management function, discipline, and team. Join me in welcoming Natalie for a presentation titled Mindset as a Catalyst for Transformation.
Hi, I'm Natalie Gibralter, and I'm the VP of Product of the Commerce business at Squarespace. I joined Squarespace over 9 years ago when we were a much smaller startup, and have seen the company through many chapters of growth. Today, I'd like to tell you about the most recent chapter of transforming how we work as a product organization, and the role that mindset has played as a catalyst in this transformation. In the summer of 2020, we had a wonderful new CPO, Paul, join our company, and his first area of focus was to help our product organization approach product development in a more outcome-driven way. Not uncommonly for our industry, we had at times ended up focusing too narrowly on the features themselves, the outputs, instead of validating quickly enough whether those features were likely to drive the intended outcomes. Paul knew that this would be a big shift for us, and he wanted us to make it successfully and quickly. He hired a well-known consulting firm that had helped many organizations like ours make the transformation to having teams responsible for solving customer problems and driving outcomes. They came to consult our leadership team in making this transformation, and that autumn, our product design and engineering teams went through a series of workshops around making this transformation. While everyone was aligned that we wanted to make this change, in the first few weeks into the workshop, there was a palpable sense of anxiety across the organization. There was a fear of the unknown, and people were unsure if we'd make this change successfully. The sentiments range from anxieties about people's own ability to make this change and whether jobs might be at risk, to uncertainty about leadership's capability of making this change, to questions about the organization's ability to operationalize this new approach. 2020 was already a year marked by uncertainty and anxiety, and this was just adding a whole new layer to it. I remember sitting down with my family for a Friday night dinner a few weeks in, grateful for the weekend. I exhaled and shared that it had been a challenging few weeks. My father asked me why, and I shared the change that we were going through, the anxiety that people were feeling about it. My dad looked at me and he said, "What a gift. You're telling me that you have an opportunity to all learn and grow together, to each get better at your respective crafts, and to be even more impactful in an already successful business? What an incredible and unique opportunity." Hearing my father's perspective changed my mindset from seeing this as a challenge on top of us to an opportunity in front of us, as a puzzle to solve rather than an obstacle to overcome. Instead of something that should overwhelm us, this was a really incredible opportunity for us to work towards. That one comment from my father not only shifted my mindset, but made me realize that so much of the success of this transformation would be based on the mindset with which we all approach it. I came back to work that Monday with a renewed focus on how to shift the organizational mindset to be open to this transformation. I began thinking about how we need to have growth mindsets not only towards ourselves, but also towards each other, our teams, and the rest of the organization going through this transformation with us. The environment and the mindsets around us would play a huge role in our mindsets towards ourselves. I'll go into more detail on the 3 mindset shifts, towards ourselves, towards each other, and together as an organization, and share some of our learnings from each. While this is still a work in progress, whether you're an executive leading an organizational transformation, a manager, or an individual contributor playing a leadership role on your team, the lessons we've had so far can be applied to leading through any change. The first mindset shift I'd like to talk about is unlocking a growth mindset towards yourself. As I shared, one aspect of the anxiety people were feeling was, am I capable of making this change? Am I capable of making it in the time frame required? And is my job or my career at risk if I don't? I'll never forget the conversation I had with an exceptionally talented and effective leader who had been in our organization for years, who shortly after we began this transformation asked me, should I continue being a manager since I don't have experience working in this way? She didn't have the experience at that point of developing products in the hypothesis-driven methodology that we were trying to develop among our teams. I reminded her of all her many strengths as a leader, her deep empathy, her strategic and analytical skills, her ability to learn really quickly, and her proven track record of doing so many times over, and assured her that I had absolutely no doubt in her ability to learn this new methodology and deepen the techniques needed to be successful in this model. There were other women who shared similar concerns and feelings with me, and I was struck by how different that was from what I was hearing from the men that I worked with, who didn't necessarily have more experience in working in this way, but whose security in their ability to make this change seemed unfazed. It's important to note that they might have felt similarly uncertain, but it wasn't being expressed in the same way. It made me realize how in going through organizational transformation, it's important to think about how people in non-dominant groups might be experiencing change differently. Especially in a year marked by droves of women leaving the workforce, particularly mothers, it's easy to imagine how different people might experience that uncertainty differently. This manager I told you about fully embraced the new methodology, and she and her team quickly became heralded as the example of how a successful team should operate. As she and I reflected on how she made this change so effectively, we realized that ultimately it came down to 3 things. The first was harnessing her confidence in herself and her capabilities. She reminded herself of her many strengths and past successes, times in her life when she had successfully learned new things, changed her mind on super meaningful topics, such that she was able to get past the imposter syndrome, no longer feel personally threatened by this change, and rather saw it as an opportunity to learn and get even better. The second was harnessing her humility that she had something new to learn. She approached this opportunity with such curiosity and humility, and she asked her team to do the same. As they went through coaching on product discovery techniques, she asked her team to approach it with an open mind and to question any assumptions or approaches that they had long held. As such, she and her team were able to so quickly absorb and apply their new learnings, as they were able to let go of feeling self-conscious that they had something new to learn. Thirdly, a common experience among people who were feeling nervous about making these changes was about where and how to get started. Some felt like they couldn't get started until the conditions were perfect, until they had gone through all the trainings, had all the resources, and so forth. For others, it was just figuring out where to start. The reality is, any answer to where do I start is a good one, because it helps you start building that muscle. It doesn't have to be everything on day one. It doesn't have to be perfect, but by starting somewhere, it helps move the theory to practice, the abstract to the concrete, and start building confidence in your ability to do it. When each individual has a few wins in doing, it helps build confidence that the rest of the transformation is within reach. Those 3 ingredients, harnessing your confidence in yourself, harnessing your humility to be open to learning, and simply choosing a place to begin to start experiencing some success, were key ingredients in helping amplify the growth mindsets of individuals towards themselves. The second mindset shift I'd like to discuss is having a growth mindset towards your team. How we view the people that we work with and their ability to change is critically important. Another aspect of the anxiety people were feeling was directed towards others. Is my team capable of making this change? Are my peers? Is leadership capable of making this change? Whether it's the engineers, designers, and other partners you work with, your manager, or your direct reports, the way we treat and view our key partners can either create space and encourage growth, or can stifle it. As I began to think about how we could catalyze the growth mindset among the individuals on our team, I started to think about what are the conditions that could help bring it out. As a parent of 2 very young children, I try to pay a lot of attention to the language that I'm using when talking with my kids to not create unintended psychological obstacles for them. For example, when my toddler occasionally behaves shyly upon meeting someone new, I'm careful not to explain away his behavior by saying, "Oh, Leo is shy," so that he doesn't internalize shyness as a fixed part of his identity. The reality is, there are certain situations that make Leo feel shy, and there are others where he doesn't feel shy at all. By speaking about it as an impermanent feeling or behavior, such as, "Are you feeling shy right now?" it creates space for him to not be constrained by defining himself as always shy. Words matter. I found myself being aware of this permanent and impermanent language showing up at work in how we talked about and towards one another as we embarked on this transformation. People were describing each other in defining terms. This person works in the old way. That person isn't outcome focused. You aren't data driven. While no one had malintent, and even often were positively trying to identify opportunities for improvement, the language and the approach we were using weren't creating the conditions for change. In fact, we were unintentionally creating barriers for our coworkers to have growth mindsets towards themselves and their ability to change. It would be critical for us to truly believe in each other's ability to grow and not be locked into old reputations. We'd have to be careful about the scripts and stories of what happened in the past versus the behaviors that are exhibited today in order to be able to acknowledge change. We'd have to be aware of the language that we're using and label each other's actions or behaviors instead of identities in order to be able to create the space for that change. For example, rather than saying, "You aren't data-driven," you could say, "I think leveraging data here would make your proposal even stronger, and here's how." By using situational language rather than dispositional language, we can create space for our coworkers to see themselves beyond their old reputations. Those 3 components, believing in each other's capability to change, not getting stuck in old stories and being fluid with reputations, and using language that assumes and encourages change, are all crucial in giving each other the space and opportunity to develop. The final mindset shift is about creating a growth mindset enterprise-wide. It becomes much easier to have a growth mindset towards yourselves and towards others when you're in an environment and in a culture that celebrates and encourages learning. The third type of question that was driving anxiety was, is the organization able to operationalize this new approach? Will our culture allow it? As leaders, we knew that we would have to invest in making this a more prevalent part of our culture. We'd have to be mindful to publicly celebrate learnings and quality failures, not just successes. We'd have to be open and vulnerable about our own learnings in order to demonstrate and model that we're on this learning journey together. A key part of that for us was creating a culture of frequent, specific, timely, and behavioral feedback in every direction as a tool to turbocharge learning. My executive coach, Karen Maudlin, introduced our leadership team to a simple and effective framework for giving feedback that quickly took hold among our teams. The framework is called 1+1 feedback, and the idea is to share timely feedback right after a presentation, a meeting, or an interaction about one specific thing that was effective and one specific thing that could be improved. Really light touch. We started leveraging this not just in one-to-one meetings, but also in groups. This created ample opportunities for people to recognize the changes that people were making and share what specifically was resonating or working well, as well as feedback on areas to improve that could be easily actioned. For example, a piece of 1+1 feedback you could provide to a colleague after a presentation could be, it was really effective how you summarized the feedback people shared with you after the presentation, which made it clear that you were internalizing what people were saying. A constructive piece of feedback could look like, I noticed that you misinterpreted some of the questions that were asked of you. Perhaps next time you could clarify the question with the asker to make sure that you're answering it accurately. By hearing this type of feedback more often and in all directions, it helped people feel less insecure about whether they were or were not on track in this transformation and whether people were identifying their changes. For our leadership team in particular, we came to start sharing feedback with one another so regularly and openly that it really strengthened our bonds as a team. We were all regularly investing in each other's success. Sharing timely, specific, and behavioral feedback regularly and in all directions is a key component of creating an environment and a culture that is ripe for learning. While we're still on this journey and have more learning to do, it's been really motivating to see this culture of continuous self-improvement and learning take hold across our teams as we lean into having growth mindsets towards ourselves, towards each other, and together as an organization. The way that this has energized our teams is palpable and infectious. Leaders across the organization with an increased sense of empowerment have been stepping up and taking spectacular initiative to drive positive change across so many of our teams. People often feel like they need to change roles, change teams, even companies to learn and to grow. It's been exceptional to see how just changing our mindset has unlocked such growth right where we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather, Cynthia, Natalie, and to all those who have joined us today. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. I encourage you to connect with our speakers in our follow-up interactive sessions later today. You can find more details on that in our agenda. Coming up next on this stage is Leadership Skills for Tomorrow. I hope all of you are enjoying the conference, learning new things, and meeting new people. There are so many ways to network with your fellow attendees. Reach out directly by clicking on any attendee name in the chat, or meet someone new in the networking mixer where you'll be paired with a fellow PM for a timed chat. You just need to click into the mixer on the left. You can also download the app for complete agenda details and access to stage recordings. Stage replays are available in the app at the end of each day, along with worksheets, slides, and resources. Thank you again for joining us, and be sure to come back for our next session on this stage, Leadership Skills for Tomorrow.